The dust from the cattle drive had barely settled when Wade Harrison first heard the sound of children's laughter rising from the old barn behind the main ranch house. And that singular moment changed everything he thought he knew about loneliness. Wade had been working the Double R Ranch in Salida, Colorado for 3 years now, ever since he had drifted into town in the spring of 1876 with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and a determination to leave his past in Texas behind. The work was hard but honest, and ranch owner Robert Richardson treated his men fairly, which was more than could be said for most operations in the territory. At 26 years old, Wade had resigned himself to the solitary life of a cowhand, spending his days mending fences, herding cattle, and sleeping in the bunkhouse with the other ranch workers who talked mainly of whiskey and card games. But that afternoon in late September of 1879, something pulled him toward that barn. The laughter was musical, punctuated by a woman's voice speaking words he could not understand. Wade dismounted from his buckskin gelding and tied the reins to the hitching post, removing his worn hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. The Colorado sun was still fierce despite the approaching autumn, and his shirt clung to his back beneath his leather vest. He approached the barn's open door quietly, not wanting to intrude but unable to resist his curiosity. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. A woman stood before 5 children, all between the ages of 7 and 12, holding up a slate board with words written in chalk. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with thick dark hair pulled back in a simple braid that fell past her shoulders. Her dress was modest but well made, a deep blue cotton that brought out the warmth in her olive skin. When she smiled at the children, her whole face seemed to light up with genuine joy. "Repitin' por favor," she said, her voice clear and melodious. "El caballo." "El caballo," the children chorused back, their pronunciation clumsy but enthusiastic. "Very good. And what does it mean?" She switched to English seamlessly, her accent adding a beautiful lilt to her words. "The horse," shouted the youngest boy, a freckled child Wade recognized as Tommy Richardson, the ranch owner's nephew. "Excellent, Tomás." The woman laughed, and the sound did something strange to Wade's chest, making his heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with the day's hard work. Wade must have made a noise because suddenly she turned toward the door, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them moved. He felt like a fool, standing there with his hat in his hands, staring at the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Can I help you?" she asked, switching to English again. There was no hostility in her voice, only polite curiosity tinged with a hint of caution that Wade supposed any woman would feel when confronted by a dusty cowboy in a barn. "I apologize, madam," Wade said quickly, finding his voice. "I heard the voices and was just curious. I work here at the ranch. Wade Harrison, at your service." He gave a small bow, feeling even more foolish but not knowing what else to do. The wariness in her eyes softened slightly. "I am Teresa Torres. Mr. Richardson hired me to teach the children Spanish. There are 5 ranches in the area that have pooled together to provide education for their children, and with so much trade happening with Mexico these days, he thought it would be valuable for them to learn the language." "That is right smart thinking," Wade said, then cleared his throat. "I did not mean to interrupt your lesson, Miss Torres. I will let you get back to it." But as he turned to leave, young Tommy called out, "Wade, are you going to learn Spanish too? Miss Torres says she will teach anyone who wants to learn." Wade looked back to see all 5 children staring at him expectantly, and Teresa Torres watching him with an expression he could not quite read. A small smile played at the corners of her lips. I think Mr. Harrison is probably too busy with his ranch work to sit in a barn learning vocabulary with children, she said. But there was something in her tone that sounded almost like a challenge. Pride and interest warred within Wade's chest. He had never been much for book learning, having left school when he was barely 12 to help support his family after his father died. But the thought of walking away and never having an excuse to see this woman again felt suddenly unbearable. "Well, now, I reckon I could spare an hour here and there," he heard himself saying. "A man can always stand to learn something new, and if it helps with the Mexican ranchers we deal with, all the better." The smile on Teresa's face grew a fraction wider. "Then you are welcome to join us, Mr. Harrison. We meet here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Today we are just finishing up, but I hope to see you on Thursday." Wade nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and walked out of that barn knowing full well that he had just made a decision that would change his life. He also knew that he had not made it purely out of a desire to learn Spanish, though he would have sworn otherwise to any man who asked. The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Wade went about his usual tasks, riding the fence line, helping break a new horse, and assisting with the preparation for moving the herd to lower pastures before winter set in. But his mind kept wandering back to the barn, to dark eyes and a musical laugh, to the way Teresa Torres had looked at him with that hint of a challenge in her expression. The other ranch hands noticed his distraction. On Wednesday evening, as they sat around the bunkhouse after dinner, Charlie Brooks, a weathered cowboy who had been at the Double R for over a decade, gave Wade a knowing look. "Heard you met the new teacher," Charlie said, tamping tobacco into his pipe. Wade looked up from the bridle he was mending. News travels fast. It does when Tommy Richardson will not stop talking about how Wade is going to learn Spanish. Charlie lit his pipe and took a long draw. "She is a pretty thing, that Miss Torres. Come up from New Mexico with her brother a few months back, from what I hear. He works as a translator and guide for the mining companies. She is staying with the widow Callahan in town. I just figured learning another language might be useful," Wade said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Charlie chuckled. "Sure, son, sure. Just do not go breaking that girl's heart. From what I understand, she has had enough trouble in her life without a lovesick cowboy making things complicated." Wade wanted to ask what kind of trouble, but that felt like gossip, and he had never been one for that. Instead, he finished mending the bridle in silence, wondering what circumstances had brought Teresa Torres to Salida, Colorado, and why the thought of her having faced difficulties made him want to protect her from any future harm. Thursday afternoon arrived at last. Wade made sure to finish his morning tasks early, then spent an embarrassingly long time washing up at the pump behind the bunkhouse and putting on his cleanest shirt. Charlie gave him a knowing look but said nothing, for which Wade was grateful. At precisely 3 o'clock, Wade walked into the barn to find the 5 children already seated on hay bales arranged in a semicircle, with Teresa standing before them holding her slate board. She looked up when he entered, and something flickered in her eyes that might have been pleasure. "Mr. Harrison, you came," she said. "I am a man of my word, Miss Torres," Wade replied, suddenly feeling too big and clumsy in the presence of these small children and this graceful woman. "Please find a seat. We are just beginning." She gestured to an empty hay bale that had clearly been placed there for him. Wade sat down, his long legs stretched out in front of him, and tried not to feel ridiculous. The smallest child, a little girl with blonde pigtails named Lucy, giggled behind her hand but stopped when her older brother elbowed her. "Today we are going to review the animals we learned on Tuesday, and then we will move on to colors," Teresa announced. "Wade," Since you were not here for our last lesson, I will catch you up. Please listen and repeat." For the next hour, Wade found himself immersed in a world of new sounds and shapes. Spanish was nothing like English, the words rolling and flowing in ways that felt foreign to his tongue. Teresa was patient, correcting pronunciation gently but firmly, and always with encouragement. She made learning feel less like a chore and more like a game, incorporating songs and movements that kept the children engaged. Wade struggled more than the children did. His tongue felt thick and clumsy around the unfamiliar syllables, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of concentration. But every time he managed to pronounce something correctly, Teresa would give him a brilliant smile that made all the frustration worthwhile. "My bien, Wade," she said after he successfully repeated El Gato Negro without stumbling. "Very good." The sound of his given name in her mouth with that slight accent did something to him. He found himself working even harder, determined to earn more of her praise. When the lesson ended and the children scattered, chattering in a mix of English and their newly learned Spanish words, Wade lingered. He pretended to adjust his boot while Teresa cleaned the slate board and organized her materials. "Thank you for letting me join the class," he said when the last child had left. "I know I am probably slowing things down for the young ones." Teresa turned to face him, clasping her hands in front of her. "Not at all. It is good for the children to see an adult taking learning seriously. Too many men think education is only for children and then complain when they cannot read a contract or calculate fair prices." "You have a passion for teaching," Wade observed. Her expression grew more animated. "I do. Growing up in New Mexico, I saw how language barriers created so many problems. People who could not understand each other, opportunities lost, friendships never formed. I thought if I could help bridge that gap, even in a small way, it would be worthwhile." "Where in New Mexico are you from?" Wade asked, genuinely curious now. "Santa Fe. My father ran a trading post there. He was American from Boston originally, but he fell in love with my mother, who was Mexican. He said learning Spanish was the best thing he ever did because it brought him to her." A shadow crossed her face. "They both died from fever 5 years ago." "I am sorry," Wade said, and meant it. "That must have been hard." "It was. Is. My brother Mateo and I have been making our own way since then. He is good with languages and numbers, so he found work easily enough, and I." She trailed off, and Wade sensed there was more to the story. "And you are an excellent teacher," he finished for her. She met his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you, Wade. That means more than you might think." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Teresa picked up her basket of materials. "I should go. The widow Callahan will have supper ready soon, and I promise to help her with the mending this evening." "May I walk you to your horse?" Wade offered. "I walk to town. It is not far, and I enjoy the exercise." "Then may I walk with you part way? I need to check on the cattle in the south pasture, and the road goes the same direction." Teresa hesitated, then nodded. "I would appreciate the company." They walked together through the golden afternoon light, their shadows stretching long before them. Wade led his horse by the reins, matching his stride to Teresa's shorter steps. For a while neither of them spoke, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. "Why did you really decide to learn Spanish?" Teresa asked suddenly. Wade considered lying or deflecting, but something about her direct gaze made him want to be honest. "At first, I was just curious about who was teaching in the barn. But after I saw you with the children, saw how much you cared about what you were doing, I wanted to know more. And I suppose I wanted an excuse to see you again." Teresa stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "That is very forward of you, Mr. Harrison." "Wade, please. And yes, madam, I suppose it is. If I have offended you, I apologize. But I have never been very good at pretending or playing games. My mama always said I was too honest for my own good. A smile tugged at Teresa's lips, despite her serious expression. I appreciate honesty. Too many men think pretty words and empty compliments are what women want to hear. But you should know, Wade, that I am not looking for a husband. My life is complicated and I have responsibilities. I came to Salada to teach and to help my brother, not to be courted. I understand, Wade said, though his heart sank a little. But might we still be friends? I truly do want to learn Spanish and I enjoy talking with you. Teresa studied him for a long moment, as if trying to see into his soul. Finally, she nodded. Friends, I think I would like that. They continued walking and Wade felt both disappointed and hopeful. It was not the answer he had wanted, but it was not a door slammed in his face either. He would take what he could get and hope that time might change her mind. Over the following weeks, Wade attended every Spanish lesson without fail. He practiced the vocabulary and phrases Teresa taught, sometimes muttering to himself while riding fence or working with the horses. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but he did not care. Learning Teresa's mother's language felt like learning a piece of her, like understanding something essential about how she saw the world. He also began to notice details he had missed in that first encounter. The way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking hard about how to explain something. The small scar on her left hand that she sometimes rubbed absently. The fact that she always wore the same few dresses, all well-made but clearly old, and how she carefully avoided getting them dirty. After classes, they would walk together, with Wade leading his horse and Teresa carrying her basket. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in her father's trading post, about learning to read from books in both English and Spanish, about her mother teaching her to make tamales and sing old songs. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his father and working to help feed his 3 younger sisters, about the day he decided to leave and see more of the country. You miss them, your sisters? Teresa asked one evening as they walked beneath a sky turning pink and gold with sunset. Every day, Wade admitted. But they are all married now with families of their own. They did not need their big brother hanging around anymore. And I needed to figure out who I was when I was not just someone's son or someone's brother. I understand that, Teresa said softly. After my parents died, I was just Mateo's sister for a long time. He tried to take care of me, make decisions for me. He meant well, but I felt like I was disappearing. Teaching gives me purpose, makes me my own person. Wade understood more than she knew. He was beginning to realize that Teresa's fierce independence was both what drew him to her and what made courting her so difficult. She was not a woman who would be easily won with flowers and sweet words. She needed to be respected, to be seen as an equal partner, not a prize to be claimed. As October deepened and the aspen trees on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold, Wade began to form a plan. If he wanted Teresa to see him as someone worthy of her attention, he needed to prove that he respected what mattered to her. And what mattered to her was language, culture, and education. So he began to study in earnest. He borrowed a Spanish primer from Teresa and spent his evenings in the bunkhouse poring over it by lamplight. He practiced with her brother Mateo when he encountered him in town, enduring the younger man's knowing smiles. He even attended Sunday services at the small Catholic church Teresa went to, following along with the Latin prayers and Spanish hymns as best he could. Teresa noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too intelligent not to see what he was doing. "You are working very hard," she commented one Thursday after class, when Wade had successfully conducted an entire conversation about the weather in Spanish. "I have a good teacher," he replied, also in Spanish, pleased with himself when he got the grammar right. "Wade." She said his name in that way she had, with a slight roll of the R that he loved. "Why are you really doing this? And please, answer me honestly." He switched back to English, wanting to make sure she understood every word. "Because the language you speak is part of who you are. Your mother spoke Spanish, you told me. It is in your blood, in your memories, in the way you see the world. If I want to truly know you, to truly communicate with you, I need to understand that part of you. I am not just learning words, Teresa. I am learning you." She stared at him, her dark eyes wide and startled. For a moment he thought he had said too much, pushed too hard. But then her expression softened into something he had never seen before, something tender and wondering. "No one has ever tried to understand me like that," she whispered. "Then they were fools," Wade said simply. Teresa looked away, blinking rapidly. When she looked back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I told you I was not looking for a husband, I remember. I told you my life was complicated. You did. I should tell you why." She took a deep breath. "There was a man in Santa Fe. His name was Richard Caldwell, and he owned one of the largest ranches in the territory. He was handsome, charming, and he said he loved me. He courted me for months after my parents died, and I was foolish enough to believe him. He promised to marry me." Wade felt a cold knot forming in his stomach but said nothing, letting her continue. "I thought he meant it. I thought he saw past my being Mexican, that he loved me for who I was. But when I asked him to set a date for the wedding, he laughed. He said that men like him did not marry girls like me. He said I should be grateful for his attention and not expect more than he was willing to give." Her voice was steady, but Wade could hear the pain beneath the words. "He was a fool and a villain," Wade said, his hands clenching into fists. "He was honest in the end. He showed me that I had been living in a fantasy. So Mateo and I left Santa Fe. We came here to start fresh, and I promised myself that I would never again let a man make me feel less than I am. I would not be any man's secret shame or temporary amusement." Wade's heart ached for her, for the pain she had endured and the walls she had built to protect herself. He understood now why she had been so cautious with him, why she had insisted they could only be friends. "Teresa, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "I am not that man. I would never be ashamed of you or hide my feelings for you. If anything, I am the one who is not worthy. You are educated, you speak 2 languages, you have traveled and seen things. I am just a cowboy who can barely read above a schoolboy level. But I am honest and I am steady, and if you gave me a chance, I would spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Wade." His name came out as barely more than a breath. "I am not asking for an answer now," he continued. "I know you need time and you have every right to be cautious. But I want you to know my intentions. I'm not learning Spanish just to make conversation. I am learning it because I want to court you properly, in the language of your mother and your heart. I am learning it because someday I hope to speak it with our children, if you will have me." The tears Teresa had been holding back spilled over then, running down her cheeks. Wade instinctively reached out to wipe them away with his thumb, and she did not pull back from his touch. "You are going to make me believe in foolish things again," she said, half laughing, half crying. "Believing that someone will treat you with respect and love is not foolish," Wade told her. "It is what you deserve." She placed her hand over his where it still cupped her cheek. "I am frightened. So am I. But the best things in life are usually a little frightening, are they not?" They stood like that for a long moment, the autumn wind rustling through the golden leaves around them, the mountains standing eternal in the distance. Then Teresa stepped back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need time," she said, "but I will think about what you have said. That is all I ask." As Wade walked back to the ranch that evening, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had been honest, had laid his heart bare, and Teresa had not rejected him outright. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The next weeks were a delicate dance. Wade continued attending the Spanish lessons, continued walking with Teresa afterward, but he did not push for more. He let his actions speak for him. When it rained and the road to town became muddy, he offered to drive Teresa in the ranch wagon, respectfully keeping his distance. When he heard that the widow Callahan's roof was leaking, he spent his Sunday repairing it, refusing payment. When Teresa mentioned missing the Mexican sweet bread her mother used to make, he rode 20 miles to a Mexican settlement to buy some from a baker there. Teresa noticed everything, he could tell. She watched him with thoughtful eyes, and sometimes he would catch her smiling at him with an expression that made hope bloom in his chest. November arrived, bringing the first snow to the high peaks. The cattle were safely in the lower pastures, and the ranch work shifted to maintenance and preparation for the harsh Colorado winter ahead. The Spanish lessons moved from the barn to the ranch house's parlor, where a fire could keep everyone warm. It was during one of these fireside lessons that things changed. They were practicing conversational Spanish, with Teresa asking questions and the students answering. When it came to Wade's turn, she asked him in Spanish what he was most grateful for. He looked directly at her and answered, also in Spanish, "I am most grateful for the day I heard children laughing and went to investigate, because that was the day I met the woman who changed my life." The children giggled, well aware of Wade's feelings for their teacher despite his attempts at discretion. But Teresa's eyes filled with tears again, though she smiled this time. After the lesson, as the children bundled up to leave, Teresa asked Wade to stay behind. His heart hammered in his chest as he waited, watching her bank the fire and gather her things with unusual slowness. "Your Spanish has improved remarkably," she finally said, not looking at him. "I have been practicing." "I know. Mateo told me you have been meeting with him twice a week for extra lessons. He tried to charge you, but you refused to let him." Wade shrugged. "He has been generous with his time." "Wade," she turned to face him finally, "I have been thinking about what you said. About your intentions, about courting me properly." He held his breath, afraid to hope. "I am still frightened," she continued. "I am still afraid of being hurt again, of trusting and being made a fool, but I have come to realize something. You are not Richard Caldwell. You have never tried to hide your feelings for me. Every time we are in town together, you walk beside me proudly. You came to my church. You learned my language. You have never once suggested that my heritage is something to be ashamed of or overcome." "Because it is not," Wade said. "It is part of what makes you who you are. I know that. But not every man would see it that way. Richard certainly did not. He wanted me to speak only English, to dress in the most American fashions, to hide the Mexican parts of myself away." She took a step closer to him. "You asked to court me in the language of my mother. I think I would like that if your offer still stands." Wade's heart soared. "It absolutely does." "Then yes, Wade Harrison, you may court me properly, in whatever language you choose." He wanted to sweep her into his arms, to kiss her until they were both breathless, but he restrained himself. This was too important, too precious to rush. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "Te prometo que no te arrepentirás," he said in careful Spanish. "I promise you will not regret it." "You better not make me regret it," she replied with a smile that was part teasing, part serious. "I do not give my trust easily." "I will treasure it," he vowed. And so began the courtship of Wade Harrison and Teresa Torres. It was not like any courtship Salada had seen before. Instead of flowers, Wade brought Teresa books in Spanish that he ordered from Denver. Instead of candy, he brought ingredients for her to teach him how to cook traditional Mexican dishes, which they would then prepare together in the widow Callahan's kitchen, much to that lady's amusement and delight. They attended church together every Sunday, and Wade sat through the entire service in Spanish without complaint. They went on long walks where they would speak only Spanish, forcing Wade to expand his vocabulary to express the things in his heart. When he struggled to find the words, Teresa would help him, patiently teaching him to express his feelings in her mother's language. Wade introduced Teresa to Robert Richardson and his wife Margaret formally, making it clear that Teresa was not just the children's teacher, but the woman he was courting. Margaret Richardson immediately took to Teresa, inviting her to the ranch house for tea and treating her with the respect due to a prospective family member. The town of Salada took notice, of course. Some people whispered, uncomfortable with a white cowboy courting a Mexican woman so openly. But Wade had earned respect through his hard work and honest dealings, and the Richardson family's approval carried weight. Most people kept their opinions to themselves or found that they did not much care either way. There was one incident, though, that tested them both. It happened in December, when Wade and Teresa were in the general store together. Wade was helping Teresa select fabric for a new dress, something that made the store owner's wife smile approvingly. But another customer, a rancher from a neighboring spread whom Wade knew only by reputation, made a crude comment about Mexican women and the men who courted them. Wade went very still. He carefully put down the bolt of fabric he had been holding and turned to face the man. Teresa grabbed his arm, but he gently removed her hand. "Sir," Wade said, his voice calm but hard as iron, "you will apologize to this lady immediately, or you and I will step outside to settle this matter." The rancher, who had clearly been drinking despite the early hour, puffed up his chest. "I do not apologize to no woman who does not deserve respect. Then we step outside." Wade's hand hovered near his gun belt, though he prayed it would not come to that. "Wade, no," Teresa said urgently. "He is not worth it." But the store owner, a middle-aged man named Thomas Pratt, intervened. "Howard, you are drunk and you are wrong. Miss Torres is a fine lady who teaches our children and attends church every Sunday. If you cannot be civil in my store, you can take your business elsewhere. And Wade is right. You will either apologize or leave." The rancher looked between Wade's unflinching stare and Thomas's stern expression. Something in their faces must have gotten through his whiskey-soaked brain, because he mumbled something that might have been an apology before stumbling out of the store. Wade turned to Teresa, who was pale but composed. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. But you should not risk yourself for me like that. Teresa, defending your honor is not a risk, it is a privilege." He took her hand right there in the store, not caring who saw. "Any man who speaks ill of you will answer to me." Thomas Pratt cleared his throat. "Miss Torres, please do not judge all of us by fools like Howard. Most folks in this town have nothing but respect for you and your work. And Wade, you are a good man. Your parents raised you right." The incident shook Teresa, Wade could tell, but it also seemed to convince her of something. That evening, as they sat in the widow Callahan's parlor for a properly chaperoned visit, she took both his hands in hers. "I was wrong," she said. "About what?" "I thought that if I kept myself protected, if I did not trust, I could not be hurt. But that is not living, that is just existing. You have shown me that real love means risking hurt, but it also means having someone who will stand up for you, who will defend you, who sees your worth even when others do not." Wade squeezed her hands. "I do see your worth, Teresa. Every single day, I know. And I see yours too. You are the best man I have ever known, Wade Harrison. The widow Callahan, who was supposedly reading in the corner but was clearly listening to every word, made a pleased sound. About time you young people figured that out. They both laughed, the tension breaking. Wade raised Teresa's hand to his lips again, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "Ti amo," he said. The words came out perfectly, no stumbling, no hesitation. "I love you." Teresa's eyes widened. "You cannot say that to me." "Why not? It is true." "Because," she struggled for words. "Because once you say it, I will have to say it back, and then everything becomes real and terrifying and wonderful." "Sounds about right," Wade said with a grin. Teresa laughed despite herself. "You are impossible. Is that a yes?" She pulled her hands free and cupped his face, looking into his eyes with such intensity that he felt it in his soul. "Ti amo también, Wade. I love you too. I love your kindness and your honesty. I love how you learn my language to understand my heart. I love how you defend me and respect me and see me as your equal. I love you, and yes, it is terrifying and wonderful and real." Wade leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was not their first kiss, but it was the first one sealed with declarations of love, and that made all the difference. The widow Callahan cleared her throat loudly. "That is quite enough of that, you two. Save something for the wedding." They broke apart, both blushing but grinning like fools. "The wedding?" Teresa asked. "Who said anything about a wedding?" Wade reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Teresa gasped. "I was going to wait until Christmas," he said, "but this moment feels right. Teresa Maria Torres, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small ruby set in it. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother sent it to me when I wrote to her about you. She said any woman who could make me learn a new language must be someone special." Teresa stared at the ring, then at Wade, then at the ring again. Tears streamed down her face. "You wrote to your mother about me. I wrote to all my sisters too. They are very excited to meet you." "Yes," Teresa breathed. "Yes, I will marry you, 1,000 times yes." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed again, longer this time, until the widow Callahan threw a small pillow at them. "Outside with you, Wade Harrison. You have gotten your answer. Now let the poor girl have a moment to breathe." Wade left, but not before kissing Teresa one more time and promising to return the next day. He walked back to the ranch in the cold December night, his heart so full of joy that he barely felt the temperature. Above him, the Colorado sky blazed with stars, more stars than he had ever seen, as if the whole universe was celebrating with him. The next months passed in a blur of wedding preparations. They decided to marry in early spring, giving Teresa time to finish the school year and allowing Wade to help with the spring calving. Robert Richardson offered to host the wedding at the ranch, and Margaret Richardson took charge of the preparations with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. Teresa's brother, Mateo, gave his blessing enthusiastically, telling Wade that he was the only man Mateo had ever thought worthy of his sister. The other ranch hands threw Wade a bachelor party at the local saloon that was remarkably tame by frontier standards, mainly involving storytelling, card games, and sincere toasts to the couple's happiness. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect spring days when the mountains stood sharp against a brilliant blue sky and wildflowers dotted the meadows with color. The ceremony was held outside, under a cottonwood tree that was just beginning to leaf out. A priest from Teresa's church officiated, conducting the service in both English and Spanish so that everyone present could understand. Teresa wore a white dress that Margaret Richardson and the widow Callahan had sewn together, with lace from Denver and pearl buttons from San Francisco. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style woven with wildflowers. Wade thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He wore a new black suit that was so stiff and formal he could barely move, but he stood tall and proud as Teresa walked toward him on Mateo's arm. When the priest asked who gave this woman to be married, Mateo said in a clear voice, "I do, knowing that she gives herself freely and has chosen a man worthy of her." The vows were traditional but meant with every fiber of their beings. When the priest said Wade could kiss his bride, he did so thoroughly, earning cheers and applause from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward was a mixture of American and Mexican traditions. There was fiddle music and dancing, but also mariachi musicians that Mateo had brought from Denver as a surprise. There was roast beef and potatoes, but also tamales and enchiladas that Teresa had spent days preparing with help from several of the ranch women who knew Mexican cooking. Wade danced with his bride until they were both dizzy and laughing. They danced to English songs and Spanish songs and songs that mixed both languages. When the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, they slipped away from the celebration to the small cabin that Robert Richardson had given them as a wedding gift. It was modest but clean and cozy, with furniture made by the ranch carpenter and linens provided by Margaret Richardson. There were dried flowers in vases and candles ready to light. It was their home, the first real home either of them had ever had that was truly their own. "Husband," Teresa said, trying out the word. "Wife," Wade replied, pulling her close. They stood in the doorway of their cabin, looking out at the land spread before them, at the mountains and the sky and the endless possibilities of their future together. "Are you happy?" Wade asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Teresa answered. "You kept your promise, you know. I have not regretted trusting you for a single moment. And you never will if I have anything to say about it." They went inside and closed the door on the world, beginning their married life with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their courtship. The years that followed were not without challenges. Wade and Teresa faced the usual struggles of frontier life. Hard winters, dry summers, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly. But they faced everything together, their partnership rooted in mutual respect and deepening love. Teresa continued teaching, her reputation growing until families from miles around wanted their children to study with her. Wade built a proper schoolhouse on the ranch with his own hands, working through the winter evenings by lamplight. It was small but sturdy, with a good stove and large windows to let in light. In the fall of 1881, their first child was born, a healthy boy with Wade's gray eyes and Teresa's dark hair. They named him Samuel Mateo Harrison, Samuel after Wade's father and Mateo after Teresa's brother. Wade cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by love and responsibility in equal measure. "Te amo, pequeño," Wade whispered to the baby in Spanish. "I will teach you to be strong and kind, to respect all people, to love without fear." Teresa, exhausted but radiant, smiled at her husband. "He is lucky to have you as a father." "We are both lucky to have you," Wade replied, kissing her forehead. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family. They named her Rosa Margaret Harrison, Rosa after Teresa's mother and Margaret after Margaret Richardson, who had become like a mother to Teresa. Rosa had Teresa's dark eyes and a stubborn streak that promised interesting years ahead. The children grew up speaking both English and Spanish fluently, code switching between languages without even thinking about it. Wade's Spanish, too, became nearly flawless through constant practice. He loved speaking Spanish with his wife and children, loved that they had this special way of communicating that connected them to Teresa's heritage. As Samuel and Rosa grew, more children followed. Another son, James, in 1885, and twin daughters, Alina and Catherine, in 1887. The little cabin became too small, so Wade built a larger house, again with his own hands and with help from the ranch community that had embraced his family. The schoolhouse Teresa had started grew too. More teachers were hired to help with the growing number of students, but Teresa remained in charge, her vision of bilingual education ahead of its time. The ranch children who studied with her went on to become translators, traders, and diplomats, their knowledge of Spanish opening doors that would have otherwise remained closed. Wade continued working at the Double R Ranch, eventually becoming foreman when Charlie Brooks retired. Robert Richardson, who had no children of his own, treated Wade like a son and often said that the ranch would be Wade's to manage even after Robert passed on. It was steady, honorable work, and it allowed Wade to provide well for his growing family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade and Teresa took a rare trip without the children, traveling to Santa Fe so Teresa could visit her parents' graves and show Wade where she had grown up. It was bittersweet for Teresa, confronting the place where she had been hurt, but also where she had formed her earliest and happiest memories. They visited the cemetery where her parents were buried, placing flowers on their graves. Wade stood quietly beside his wife, one arm around her shoulders, as she spoke to her parents in Spanish, telling them about her life, her husband, her children, telling them she was happy. "They would have loved you," Teresa said to Wade as they walked away from the graves. "I hope so. I wish I could have known them. My father would have appreciated how hard you worked to learn Spanish. My mother would have loved how kind you are to me, how you treat me as an equal partner." She squeezed his hand. "They would have seen what I see, a good man with a good heart." They visited the trading post where Teresa had grown up, now run by someone else. The new owner was kind, letting them look around and sharing stories about how the post had thrived. Teresa pointed out where she used to read as a child, where her mother taught her to cook, where she first learned English from her father's books. Wade saw Richard Caldwell once, from a distance. The man had grown fat and red-faced and was arguing loudly with someone in the street. Wade felt no anger toward him, only pity. This man had had the chance to love Teresa and had thrown it away because of pride and prejudice. His loss, Wade's infinite gain. They returned to Colorado renewed and even more certain of their love. Their children welcomed them home with shouts and hugs, and life resumed its normal rhythms of work and school and family dinners, where everyone talked over each other in 2 languages. As the century drew to a close, Wade and Teresa found themselves settling into middle age with grace and contentment. Their children were growing into capable, bilingual adults who moved easily between the Anglo and Hispanic communities. Samuel was training to become a teacher like his mother, wanting to continue her work. Rosa had a gift for mathematics and wanted to study accounting, a field just beginning to open to women. Wade and Teresa would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had grown to love, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes they spoke English, sometimes Spanish, often a mixture of both. After so many years together, language almost did not matter. They understood each other in ways that transcended words. "Do you ever regret it?" Teresa asked one evening. "Learning Spanish to court me, I mean. It must have been so much work." Wade looked at his wife, her hair now threaded with silver, her face lined with laugh lines and the marks of a life well lived. Regret it. Teresa, learning Spanish was the smartest thing I ever did. Not just because it won your heart, but because it taught me that love means effort. It means trying to understand someone in the deepest way possible, meeting them where they are instead of asking them to come to you. That lesson has served me well not just with you, but with our children, with the people we work with life itself. Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Wade Harrison. I loved you when you could barely string 3 Spanish words together, and I love you now when you speak it as well as I do. Te amo, Teresa. Always have, always will. Always, she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had shone on their wedding night, on the birth of each of their children, on every moment of joy and sorrow and simple everyday contentment. More years passed. Their children married and had children of their own. Wade and Teresa became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The world changed around them as the wild frontier of their youth became more settled and civilized. Automobiles began to appear on the roads that had once been traveled only by horse and wagon. Telephones connected distant places. The United States entered a new century, full of promise and change. Through it all, Wade and Teresa remained constants in their community. The schoolhouse Teresa founded continued to grow and thrive, eventually becoming part of the public school system, with bilingual education as a cornerstone of its approach. Generations of children grew up learning both English and Spanish, thanks to the vision of one dedicated teacher. Wade, now an old man with silver hair and weathered skin, still rode out to check on the cattle sometimes, though his son Samuel had taken over most of the ranch management. The double R had passed to Wade when Robert Richardson died, a gift in Richardson's will that Wade had accepted with tears of gratitude. He ran it with the same fairness and integrity that Richardson had shown, and it prospered under his care. On a bright spring day in 1925, Wade and Teresa celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered around. There were dozens of them, a boisterous mix of ages and personalities, all speaking the same fluid combination of English and Spanish that Wade and Teresa used. Little Maria Elena, their youngest great-granddaughter, climbed onto Wade's lap. "Tell us the story, great-grandfather. Tell us how you won great-grandmother's heart." Wade looked to Teresa, who smiled and nodded. "I suppose I could tell that story one more time," he said. He told them about hearing children's laughter and investigating, about seeing the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on teaching Spanish to ranch children. He told them about deciding to learn the language, about struggling with pronunciation and grammar but persevering because the reward was worth the effort. "Great-grandmother did not make it easy for me," Wade said, winking at Teresa. "She told me we could only be friends." "I had to be sure you were serious," Teresa interjected. "So many men say pretty things but do not mean them." "But great-grandfather meant it, right?" Maria Elena asked. "He did," Teresa confirmed. "He learned my mother's language to court me properly. He showed me that he respected where I came from, that he was not ashamed of my heritage. He stood up for me when others spoke unkindly. He kept every promise he ever made." "Still do," Wade said, taking Teresa's hand. Even after 45 years, the simple act of holding her hand made him feel young and hopeful again. Their grandson Thomas, Samuel's oldest son, raised a glass. "To Grandpa Wade and Grandma Teresa, you taught all of us what real love looks like. Here, here." The gathered family chorused, raising their own glasses. As the celebration continued around them, Wade and Teresa slipped away for a moment of quiet. They walked slowly to the cottonwood tree where they had been married, now massive and thick, trunked with age. 45 years, Teresa marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Wade agreed. The days are long but the years are short, as my mother used to say. Are you happy, Wade? Truly happy? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Teresa, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You, our children, our grandchildren, this life we built together. If I died tomorrow, I would die a happy man, knowing I got to spend 45 years loving you and being loved by you. Do not talk about dying, Teresa scolded, but her eyes were bright with emotion. We are old, my Amor. We cannot pretend otherwise, but I am not afraid because whatever comes next, we will face it like we have faced everything. Together. Teresa wrapped her arms around her husband, and they stood beneath the cottonwood tree, holding each other as the sounds of their family's laughter drifted across the yard. Wade Harrison and Teresa Torres Harrison lived several more good years, surrounded by family and love. When Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1929 at the age of 76, Teresa was holding his hand. His last words were in Spanish. Te espero, my amor. I will wait for you, my love. Teresa followed him less than a year later, her heart simply giving out one quiet morning. She died with a smile on her face, and a letter from Wade clutched in her hand. A letter he had written to her on their first anniversary, promising to love her forever. They were buried side by side beneath the cottonwood tree where they had married. Their headstones simple but bearing inscriptions in both English and Spanish. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered for the funeral. A massive clan united by the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other, despite fear and uncertainty. The story of Wade Harrison and Teresa Torres became part of local legend. The cowboy who learned Spanish to court the teacher, the woman who trusted love again, the couple who built something beautiful and lasting. Their descendants continued to live in and around Salida, Colorado, carrying forward the values of respect, hard work, and love that Wade and Teresa had embodied. The schoolhouse Teresa founded still stands, now a historic building but still used for community education. A plaque outside tells her story. Teresa Torres Harrison, dedicated educator who believed that language builds bridges between people. She taught children to see past differences and find common ground. Her legacy lives on in every student who learns to communicate across cultures. In the family histories passed down through generations, Wade and Teresa's love story is told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but remaining essentially true to its core. A man heard laughter in a barn. A woman taught children the language of her mother. He learned that language to court her properly, to show respect for who she was and where she came from. She learned to trust again, to believe that real love exists and that it was worth the risk. From that simple beginning came a love that spanned 46 years of marriage, 5 children, dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a legacy of bilingual education that changed their community. All because Wade Harrison decided to learn Spanish, and Teresa Torres decided to give love one more chance. In the end, what they built together was more than a family or a legacy. It was proof that when two people commit to truly understanding each other, when they work to communicate not just with words but with actions and respect and dedication, they can create something that lasts long after they are gone. They showed that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new each day, to see and honor the other person in all their complexity. The cottonwood tree still stands in Salida, Colorado, older now and more gnarled but still strong. In spring, it puts out bright green leaves, and in autumn they turn golden and flutter to the ground. Children play beneath its branches, speaking in English and Spanish and sometimes a mixture of both, not knowing they are playing on sacred ground where two people once promised to love each other forever and kept that promise against all odds. And if you listen very carefully on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, some say you can still hear the echo of laughter, the sound of children learning Spanish from a dedicated teacher, and the soft murmur of two voices speaking words of love in the language of the heart. That is the story of Wade Harrison and Teresa Torres, the cowboy and the teacher, two souls who found each other across cultural divides and built a love that changed not just their lives but the lives of everyone they touched. It is a story of courage and dedication, of overcoming fear and prejudice, of the power of language to bridge divides and bring people together. Most of all, it is a story of love, pure and simple and true, the kind of love that makes everything else possible.